Hello, everyone. This is Bill Bianchi with PDA Chicago with another in our series on progressive voices from the city. And today we're talking with Cook County Commissioner and candidate for mayor, Jesus Chuy Garcia. Thank you for talking with us today.
Great to be with you, Bill.
You know, for a young guy, you've had a long and diverse political career in Chicago and Cook County. You've been an alderman, you've been an Illinois senator, and now you're a member of the Cook County Board. Could you tell us a little bit about what drove you to those three different positions and what you've taken away from it?
Well, I really can't talk about my elective office experience without talking about my nonprofit community organizing experience. And it was my work as a paralegal in Chicago for the Legal Assistance Foundation that really opened my eyes to the need for electing more progressives to places like Chicago City Council, to the Illinois legislature. When I visited Springfield in 1977, when legislators were considering a whole host of bad immigration-related issues, that I really got to see how powerless the Latino community was, how underrepresented other minority communities were in Springfield, how we were missing in terms of a presence, in terms of a legislative voice, and how that needed to grow and change. That raised my awareness about political office and electoral politics, but looking for an alternative to Chicago's tradition of machine politics and machine control of politics, and seeking to do it in a different way, in an independent manner, in a with a progressive thrust, through multi-racial, multi-ethnic coalition building. And that's what sort of led me into electoral politics, the desire to want to make positive changes in communities, the realization that public policies get decided oftentimes by legislators and executive office holders, and the urgent need to really get involved and seek to bring about more community transformations.
Okay, and now that drove you to run for alderman, I guess, and you played a very important role in Harold Washington's administration. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my run for the city council had much to do with the movement for empowerment of the minority community in Chicago, African Americans, Latinos. Harold Washington had become elected mayor in 1983, was being hampered in his ability to govern normally and for the people by a majority obstructionist black in the city council. Part of the reason for that obstructionist block was due to the fact that the Voting Rights Act had been violated, and it made it difficult for African Americans and Latinos to elect people of their own choosing. When we challenged the city ward map in federal court, got it struck down, a new map was redrawn, special elections were held, I ran, I got elected. I helped break the deadlock of the old obstructionist block, and it gave Harold Washington a majority in the city council. The city then was able to move forward, becoming one of the most dynamic governments in the country, one of inclusion. Women became very important in that administration. People of color were elected to positions. It became one of the most diverse governments in Chicago history, with a progressive thrust toward fairness, to a greater equitable distribution of city resources and projects throughout. It really modernized the city of Chicago and reflected the new majority that lived in Chicago.
And we're still talking about it today as the kind of the gold standard of electoral office here in Chicago. How would you say your relationship with Harold Washington shaped you politically? What specific?
Harold Washington was a great inspiration and a mentor to me, someone who understood the city's legacy of machine politics, someone who came to realize that he had a historical responsibility to change that way of doing politics, of doing business, of administering the city, of opening the books of City Hall, having transparency, accountability, really being a very progressive-minded mayor, someone who had to overcome political challenges, the old obstructionist bloc, someone who had to figure out how to move the city forward under a very polarized electorate, black and white and Latino and some of the other communities in Chicago, but someone who persevered because of his conviction that the only way to move Chicago forward was with a progressive thrust of inclusiveness, of transparency, of equity, and an embrace of all of Chicago's diversity and all of its neighborhoods. That's what I learned from Harold Washington, that you didn't need to compromise on principles, you could compromise on tactics, but that it was important to stand up for core values in life and certainly in political life and governance.
Okay. Let's fast forward now to the incredible challenge you've taken on. Rahm Emanuel is not only a powerful politician, he seems to have unlimited financial resources. In fact, even as we talk today, his money pile is probably growing every day. There's no stopping it. And he's connected throughout the entire country. There's no question about that. So why have you taken on this really very difficult political challenge? There might have been some easier things you could have run for.
Certainly, without a doubt. I accepted this challenge because I think that Chicago is really at a crossroads in its development at this point in time in history. I think people in neighborhoods throughout the city over the past 4 years have come to realize that if the city of Chicago is going to be a place for everyone to work, to go to school, to play, to grow old in, that we've got to change the course of where the city is heading. It needs to be about ordinary people, about working people. The priorities need to be not just catering to the downtown prosperity and putting most of our resources there. We need to focus on community safety, making our communities a safe place for everyone to enjoy. That hasn't happened. We need community policing urgently to create a relationship of trust and mutual respect between community residents and the police. We need to increase our police force to give them good training and the preparation to engage in that building of trust and respect with community residents, or else the city won't be a place that's livable or sustainable. Second, core thrust and priority for my administration will be investing in Chicago's neighborhood schools, public schools. Public schools are essential if Chicago is going to be a city that is going to grow its population, is going to engage in the building of new housing, is going to have retail strips in the neighborhoods with vitality, that people earning better wages are able to sustain, thus creating new businesses, new job opportunities for people in those neighborhoods. If Chicago truly wants to be a world-class city in the 21st century, it has to have solid world-class neighborhoods. That's what's missing in Chicago, the urgency for ensuring that Chicago works for all of its people, not just for the 1%, is making the neighborhoods the centerpiece of governance and investing in them. Public safety and good schools are key to creating the environment for other good things to happen in terms of local development. You want to see new housing occur, you better have safe neighborhoods and good schools. You want to see some retail strips emerge in areas that haven't seen that type of activity, you better have safe neighborhoods and good schools. The urgency of taking Chicago back through a democratic, multi-ethnic movement is now, and that's why I'm a candidate for mayor of the city of Chicago.
Okay, you've covered a lot of territory there, and we'll get back to some of that, but I want to stay with the mayor for just, the current mayor, for just a minute. He's been defined as mayor he's been called mayor 1%, meaning he primarily represents the rich and the powerful. How would you define this mayor?
I would define him as an outsider. I would define him as a Washington insider who has spent most of his life raising money for partisan purposes. courting millionaires and billionaires to invest in races in the National Congress. Someone who I think lost touch, if he ever had it, with ordinary people. He didn't grow up in a Chicago neighborhood, doesn't really understand the daily challenges of raising a family, of worrying about safety in the neighborhood, doesn't really understand the role of public education as an equalizer, as a gateway of opportunity, especially for people who don't have money, people who want to go on to higher education but don't have a college fund, people like myself who, were it not for the public university system in Illinois, would not have been the first in my family to go to school. And I think that that is the reality the mayor doesn't get, and it's why he's turned off so many people in Chicago. He seems to have come to Chicago with a corporate agenda to drive down wages, to close schools, to privatize everything, to really, abolish what has been a city with many public institutions. This is an opportunity to reestablish our commitment to have robust public institutions because they're good for the public good.
One thing about this city that concerns me is that there seems to be a level of hopelessness that our politics will never change, that we're kind of locked into a corrupt system. And I'm wondering, what could your campaign say or do that might restore some hope that you really can make changes for the average person?
I think this is an opportunity to take back Chicago, to replant the seeds of democracy, of accountability, of having someone who's a product of Chicago's neighborhoods leading the city, presiding over its city council, setting a course that says we're going to embrace all the people of Chicago, we're going to care about those who can't care for themselves, we're going to care for people with disabilities, for people who need mental health, for people who rely on public schools to get, their education to prepare for the future. We're going to invest in job training so that people who've lost hope and who live in despair can have a chance at earning a good wage, providing for their families, and then seeing their neighborhoods do better because people are earning a higher wage. It's really an opportunity that we may not have in a long, long time again to demonstrate that Chicago today is a different place, that people have a greater disposition to engage in understanding that this neighborhood is connected to that neighborhood and that neighborhood to the following one, and overcoming some of the barriers we've had related to racial polarization, to ethnic separatism, to differences in faith, and to really come together to build the Chicago of the 21st century, and again, putting ordinary people first.
Okay, let's go in a little detail on some of the issues now. In terms of education, you've mentioned the closing of the schools, of course, is the big issue that has been resonating in the news for the past couple of years. But that's happened now. What do you think you could do to kind of ameliorate some of the pain, and are you thinking about maybe even reversing some of the closing?
I think the most important thing we can do for public education is to demonstrate our commitment and our faith in it by investing in the schools in Chicago neighborhoods, being more equitable about resource allocation, making sure that children in some of the poorest parts of the city have good experienced teachers, have the books and other supplies like technology that they need, making sure that they have access to nourishment in the morning, breakfast, and lunch, and then talking about enriching the lives of students, parents, and community residents at those schools by keeping school buildings open after school hours, to do enrichment activities, whether it's help with homework, learning how to operate a computer, learning English as a second language, participating in arts programs. Many of our arts programs have been eliminated over time. This is what you can do in the after-school hours, making schools the center of community. That can go a long way toward improving the quality of life, especially in places that suffer economically, where there's high unemployment, that also tend to have the highest levels of violence in the city of Chicago. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about a new set of priorities to invest in Chicago and in Chicago's neighborhoods.
Okay, and one of the priorities for the past few years in Chicago has been charter schools, at least with this school board. And a number of them have opened, and there's some indication that they get more resources than the public schools. What are you going to say to the parents who put their kids in charter schools, and what in general do you think should be done about it?
One, I realize that there are some good charter schools in the system, but many others have simply proliferated because private interests have wanted to replace public education with private education. There are some charter schools that are unionized, some charter schools that have accountability, have a good relationship with parents. Many others don't. On a whole, many charter schools are not performing better than public neighborhood schools. Many of them are performing worse than neighborhood schools. By opening all the charters that we've opened up, we've created a dual system of education without any proof that the charter schools do better, perform better than neighborhood schools. I would place a moratorium on the opening of new charters, recognizing that there are some good charter alternative schools that do a great job with kids. I've visited many of those schools, and while there are some good charter schools, we need to invest in the neighborhood public schools that we have in Chicago, and they shouldn't be pitted against each other. Many of these charter schools have also had issues with corruption and scandals, nepotism, and favoritism within them. We need to make sure that that is stopped. But again, the priority would be to invest in good neighborhood schools.
Okay. In line with that, I want to look a little bit at city finances and also the school board's finances. You know, Chicago, we all know, or we should know, that it's a very rich city. There's wealthy people here, and it's a global financial center. Yet the city finances are looking pretty bad right now. There's a huge pension obligation unfunded, and city and the school board budgets, I believe, are in deficit, in red. And so as mayor, how are you going to tackle these financial problems and fund your agenda?
One, I believe in fairness in taxation. Part of the reason that we're in this very difficult financial strait at present is because we haven't made payments and obligations that were due to the pension funds, for example, when they were due. We decided to kick the can down the road, and now the situation is quite challenging and has a great sense of urgency. Because I believe in a taxation system that is fair, I think we need to look at how we get to having a more progressive system that moves us away from over-reliance on property taxes to fund schools and other essential services to one that is rooted in fairness and a progressive system of taxation, and that would be a graduated state income tax. That would require some big changes, including amending the Illinois Constitution, but the crisis is going to drive us there anyhow. So I would look at any revenue measures that are progressive and not regressive. We're relying right now on many regressive forms of fees that in reality, according to an analysis by the Chicago Tribune, has increased property taxes because of their regressive nature on people all over. They're the red light cameras, the speed cameras, many of the other fees that have gone up astronomically because we're looking for new ways to fund the city's operations. But we need to look at taxation that is fair and sustainable into the future. We're waiting for the Illinois Supreme Court on the pension issue to tell us whether it's unconstitutional. Lower courts have ruled that going back on our commitment to retirees is unconstitutional. We have to look at ways of honoring those commitments. Once the Supreme Court rules, it will be incumbent on the state legislature to act, and then we'll have a more accurate picture of the challenges before us as we look at how we're going to make those payments, whether we can restructure some of that for some time, but we need to be committed not to deteriorating the quality of life and the security of retirees, but to ensuring that we fulfill the promise that was made to them.
Great. Some of the sources of new revenue that have been suggested, and they've been floated around for a while, is one is something called the commuter tax, whereas we would tax the people who live outside of the city but work in Chicago. And the other is the financial transaction tax, which would be essentially a sales tax on the trading of futures and various commodities. What are your thoughts about that as a source of revenue for the city?
We're continuing to pore over the experiences of financial transaction taxes in the European Union. That's where countries have engaged in that. One of the concerns that people have raised as we have considered taking a measure like that is the effect on the financial markets locally, whether the argument that they would flee and leave the area or not is a true thing, how much could be generated through them. I have not come out in favor of a financial transaction tax. Many of my friends believe that that's the way to go. We're still studying it, shouldn't be discarded, but it's part of a larger variety of revenue measures that we seriously will have to undertake. The commuter tax, I'm concerned about its potential regressive effect on working class suburban communities like Cicero and Berwyn and Maywood, Blue Island and Midlothian. Those are folks in working class communities who, get on a train and a bus each day to come to work in the city. I'm not sure that it makes sense to tax them when they're earning, salaries that are not what we would think would entail progressive taxation. People making, over $100,000 a year, for example. So that's part of my concern with the commuter tax at this time.
Okay. What about the TIFs? Just for people who don't know, that's tax increment financing. Last year, around $400 million was taken out of the property flow of property taxes to the schools and the parks and other entities and put into these TIF district accounts, and I believe a third of the city now is in some kind of a TIF district.
Yes.
And so is this a pot of gold that we can tap into?
It's a pot of gold. Unfortunately, it's been a pot of gold for the mayor of the city of Chicago to use pretty much at his whims. This is public tax dollar money. There ought to be more light shown on it to figure out how much is actually in there. I've heard reports of as much as $1.7 billion public tax money that's been diverted to this fund. It shouldn't be at the money shouldn't be used solely at the discretion of the mayor. We ought to get a full accounting of what's there, and I think some of that money could be used for part of the pension problem. I think part of it could be used for school improvements. It could, also be used to cover part of the cost of hiring additional policemen for community policing in Chicago's neighborhoods. The point I'm trying to make is that there ought to be more scrutiny over the use of that money. It shouldn't only be there for the mayor's pet projects to be funded, because after all, it is taxpayer dollars, and the taxpayers ought to have a say-so over its use.
Okay. What about the community mental health and the community clinics that have been closed as a money-saving issue? First, do you think they did save that money, and what would you do when you're the mayor?
The closure of those clinics is another sign of how to touch the mayor is with the users, with the patients who were using the mental health clinics. After the closure of clinics in Chicago, those people had to go somewhere. And you know where they turned up? Talk about passing the buck to another entity of government. They turned up at Cook County Jail. People were arrested because they weren't being seen. People were arrested because they weren't getting their medications, and they wound up in Cook County Jail when they're not criminals. After they're in Cook County Jail, our hospital, the Cermak Hospital, has become the largest provider of mental health services in the city and in Cook County by default because of a bad policy decision that was taken by Mayor Emanuel. The county has become that provider. Treating people at Cook County Jail, treating people at the Cermak Hospital in Cook County Jail is not the best environment to provide mental health services. We need to figure out how to provide those services by the city in a more welcoming environment, more conducive to people being able to address their health needs. Mental health is a fundamental right. It was wrong to have closed all those clinics.
Okay, let's shift a little bit now and talk a little bit about the campaign. What's your strategy to win?
My strategy to win is to make the case to every community, to every group in the city of Chicago, that the city is moving in the wrong direction. It needs to move in a new direction, a new set of priorities that places the neighborhoods first, very, very urgently. In order to make victory possible, we've got to engage in building a new coalition, multi-ethnic coalition across neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, rooted in democracy, rooted in transparency and accountability, and taking our city back. A part of that agenda is community safety. Another element would be improving neighborhood schools. Why do I think that we can do it? Because we have people. Remember that my candidacy registered the greatest number of signatures to get on the ballot. We weren't even challenged because they knew that ours were good. Over 1,000 people circulated petitions over a 3-week period to register my candidacy. We will be able to organize thousands of people to knock on doors, deliver our message of positive change. We want to follow in the footsteps of what was done in New York, essentially taking city governance out of the hands of the billionaires and the millionaires who had sought to privatize the city, to lower wages, and to make it work only for the elite in that city. Chicago has a chance to bring democracy back, engage in a new heightened level of alliance and coalition building, and putting the interests of ordinary people first. That is the message that we're going to deliver. And we're raising money. We've almost hit the $1 million mark to enable us to deliver the message, to print good publicity, to get on television and radio as we move into January, when people will be more focused on this election and the potential for change in Chicago.
Okay. Endorsements are a key part of a winning campaign, and you were endorsed in pretty dramatic fashion by Karen Lewis and the Chicago Teachers Union. How did that come about? Had you been talking to them, or?
Well, obviously, you know, I've had conversations about the future of the city with people for a long, long time. People have asked me to consider running for mayor, given my long history as a progressive coalition builder in Chicago. After Karen was unable to make the run because of her health, we had a conversation about it. She urged me to consider running. Other people who were supporting her.
She personally asked you.
She personally asked me. Other people who were supporting her asked me because they didn't want Rahm Emanuel to have, you know, to go unopposed or not have a strong opponent. Mm-hmm. So I decided to get in the race because of my conviction that this is an election more important than at any time over almost a 30-year period, mm-hmm. that we better take our city back and have good government and ordinary people at the center of that government.
Okay. I'm going to switch a little bit now and talk. The Democratic Party dominates city, county, state government. Yet it seems, at least from my point of view, many of the voters who support the party, low-wage workers, immigrant workers, organized labor, single women, youth, students, their economic situation really isn't improving. In fact, it's getting worse, even at the same time that the rich get richer. So I want to know, has the party lost touch with its base?
I think some of the leaders of the party are confused. They don't have clarity. They're doing things the way that things have always been done. It's really important to understand that the recession of 2008 really hurt people in a very profound manner. People lost their life savings. People lost their homes. Many people today are paying mortgages on homes that are underwater. People lost their jobs. People were unemployed and underemployed. Many young people didn't have jobs over that time. Yes, so people are still hurting. I don't think that some of the leaders of the party really understand how profound this was, how people became impoverished over a short period of time, are hurting and are looking for economic justice and a chance to get back on their feet and have a greater say-so, while they watch the wealthiest sectors in this country get even richer. And then they saw the charade of all the Wall Street types that brought us the Great Recession, and no one went to jail. There's a real sense of injustice and anger that happened, and that then they moved to take power and to control governments in many of the cities of the country, Chicago being one of them.
That's true. I believe you were one of the founders of the 22nd Ward Independent political organization,
yes,
or precinct organization, and now you serve as the floor leader of the Cook County Board, President Tony Preckwinkle. So do you see yourself still as an independent, a guy fighting from the outside, as you maybe were back in Harold Washington days, or now do you see yourself as, it seems like there's a bridge there that you need to cross somehow. How do you bring those two positions together?
I've always considered myself an independent, progressive, activist legislator for my community, whether it was city council, state senate, or county board. At Cook County Board, remember we inherited a government that was adrift, known for its corrupt practices, its waste, its inefficiency. Cook County for a long time worked for the benefit of some politicians. That's changed. Over a 4-year period, we were able to give that government purpose, begin addressing some of the most pressing needs in the area of criminal justice. We reduced the jail population. We made the practices at the jail fairer. We've raised awareness about restorative justice. We have modernized the government in a good way. That agenda at Cook County government was essentially a reform agenda consistent with the principles of independent political action. They're not at odds. There wasn't much compromising to be done because Cook County government was so bad that in order to clean it up, it required a lot of work and a lot of modernization that has taken place. It was difficult to deal with the budget deficits in our first year. The hardest decision that I had to make was to agree that we had to cut the payroll by 500 employees. Those were the layoffs that took place during that time, but we didn't have to do any thereafter. It was a lot of difficult medicine and shared sacrifice that needed to be made. But I found my historic commitment to those principles of progressive political independence to be aligned with the work that we did at Cook County.
Okay. What's at stake in this election? Why should it matter to people outside of Chicago whether or not you win?
This election is about restoring democracy in Chicago. It's about putting ordinary people first. It's about taking the city back and revitalizing Chicago's public institutions. There hasn't been an election as important as this election in a long, long time. And if people want to be heard, if people want to have more control over what happens in Chicago, they need to come out and vote on February 24th and take their city back for the good of all of the residents of Chicago.
Okay, and if people want to support your campaign, what should they do?
They can go to GarciaForChicago.com. That's our website. We just relaunched it. There's all kinds of information. They can sign up to be volunteers, tell us where they live, and we'll also be able to connect them to the many neighborhood offices that will be opening in the next few days. We have a downtown office at Washington and Des Plaines with more neighborhood locations coming online very quickly.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Commissioner Garcia.
Thank you, Bill.
And good luck on your campaign.
Thank you so much.
This is going to be historical, I think.
Good luck to PDA.
Okay, well, thank you. And that was another Progressive Voices from the City of Chicago. Thank you.